My name is Don, and my wife, Carla, and I have been married for 8.5 years. We have two kids, Steve, who's 8, and Lori, who's 4. From the outside, we look like a happy, thriving family. And for a long time, Carla and I didn't follow the traditional path. She was pregnant when we got married, and Steve was born just 6 months after our wedding. Most of our friends and family accepted it for what it was, life moving fast. But her parents? They never did. To them, I was the reckless guy who had ruined their daughter's life, the one who had taken her away from the future they had imagined for her. No matter what I did, no matter how much I loved their daughter, how hard I worked, or how well I provided, I was never good enough. And maybe, in their eyes, I never would be. I won't pretend they didn't have a reason to be upset. It's true. I was Carla's first, and I convinced her to take that step with me. But I never tricked her. I loved her. Still, her parents never forgave me for what they saw as stealing their daughter's potential. But their opinion stopped matching a long time ago. Carla and I met when she was a high school senior in Chicago Heights, while I was in my second year at the University of Illinois. From the moment I saw her, I knew. It wasn't just attraction. It was an instant connection. We became inseparable, our relationship unfolding effortlessly. She was beautiful, full of life, and everything felt right. A month into dating, we took that next step, and from then on, every time we were together, it was impossible to keep our hands off each other. After Carla graduated, she moved back in with her parents and started working as a teller at Chase Manhattan Bank. I was still in school, but I made the drive to see her every weekend. Sometimes in Chicago Heights, sometimes in Oak Lawn where my parents lived. Then, with 1 year left before my degree, Carla told me she was pregnant. Everything moved fast after that. We got married in November, and Steve was born in May. 2 weeks after his birth, I graduated and secured a job in airport security at O'Hare. Carla stayed with her parents until I had everything set up, and then, at last, we moved into our own place. For 8 years, we built a life together. Good jobs, a new house, promotions, more income, a growing family, the arrival of Lori. Life was good. We had everything, or so I thought. The first sign of trouble. Looking back, the moment that changed everything started off as something so simple, so ordinary. Carla and I were going through one of those minor, recurring arguments every couple has. Who was keeping the other from getting a good night's sleep? She swore I was the problem. Said I snored like a chainsaw. I told her she was just as bad, that she made this strange, high-pitched squeaking sound in her sleep that could wake the dead. She refused to believe me. I refused to back down. It wasn't a serious fight, just one of those stubborn standoffs couples have. But something about the way she constantly blamed me, never admitting even the possibility that she might be just as bad, rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe it was her parents' voices still echoing in my head, their judgment lingering after all these years. I already took enough blame from them. I wasn't going to take it from her too. So, in a mix of playfulness and determination, I brought home a voice-activated recorder from work and set it up on the nightstand beside our bed. All right, I told Carla with a grin. Let's settle this once and for all. She laughed, rolling her eyes. Fine, but don't be mad when you hear how terrible you sound. The next morning, we both woke up at the same time. I reached for the recorder, rewound the tape, and pressed play. What we heard was undeniable. First me, a deep, heavy snore that sounded exactly like the chainsaw Carla had described. She smirked. See? Now you know what I deal with every night. Then came the next sound, a rhythmic, high-pitched squeak, squeak, squeak during the pauses between my snores. Carla's eyes widened. Oh my God, she gasped. I burst out laughing. Told you, I teased. She covered her face, shaking her head in embarrassment before breaking into laughter herself. I sound horrible. I can't believe it. I smirked. Yeah, we both need to work on this if we don't want to banish each other from the bedroom. She smiled, pressing a soft kiss against my lips. I'm sorry I blamed you, honey. Looks like we're both guilty. I pulled her close, wrapping my arms around her. The argument was forgotten, replaced with the warmth of a shared joke. One thing led to another, and soon we weren't thinking about snoring at all. By the time we were done, both kids were awake, and we ended up running late for work. It was just another moment in our life together. A moment I never could have guessed would come back to haunt me. The discovery that changed everything. A couple of days passed. I had completely forgotten about the recorder. One evening, Carla asked me to come home early. She had a late meeting at the bank and needed me to watch the kids. After I put them to bed, I wandered around the house, tidying up a bit. That's when I spotted the recorder still sitting on the nightstand. Curiosity got the best of me. I picked it up, rewound the tape, and pressed play. At first, it was exactly what I expected, our usual mix of snores and squeaks from 2 nights ago. I chuckled to myself, shaking my head. But as I kept listening, something changed. The sounds were different. There was a gap in the recording. Then voices. Not just Carla's. A man's voice. My body went cold. I turned up the volume, listening more intently. It wasn't just casual conversation. There was laughter, soft whispers, intimate murmurs. And then, I stopped breathing. This couldn't be happening. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear over the sound of my own pulse. I hit rewind. Listen again. The voices were clearer this time. Carla's voice. Another man's voice. Laughter. Flirtation. The unmistakable sounds of betrayal. My hands trembled as I turned off the recorder. Everything around me blurred, my mind struggling to catch up with what I had just heard. One thought pushed through the chaos. This is real, and everything was about to change. The moment of truth. Curiosity turned to devastation in an instant. I had expected to hear more of our snoring when I pressed play on the recorder, maybe even another moment of laughter like before. But what I found instead, it shattered everything. The tape contained intimate sounds, but not of Carla and me. Another man. In our home. In our bed. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was physical, deliberate, and took place in the most sacred space of our marriage. I sat there, frozen, unable to process what I was hearing. My stomach twisted violently, my skin going cold as my mind tried to reject what was so painfully clear. This couldn't be happening. I felt like an intruder in my own life, like I had stepped into someone else's nightmare. But no, this was my reality, and I had the evidence to prove it. Taking control, I forced myself to breathe. I had to think. The kids. I couldn't let them see me like this. With my hands shaking, I called our neighbor, Judy, and asked if she could watch Steve and Lori for a little while. I told her I had a work emergency, something urgent that needed my full attention. Judy was more than happy to help. I took the kids over to her house, telling them to behave and reassuring them I'd be back in time for dinner. They were thrilled to play with Judy's kids, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Once I returned home, I locked the bedroom door and pressed play again. This time I listened, really listened. The ultimate betrayal. At first, it was just murmurs, soft whispers, gentle laughter. Then his voice. "Oh my goodness, Steve. It's been too long since you've been close with me. I've really missed it over the past few months." "Steve." My blood ran ice cold. "Don't worry, my dear. I'll be intimate with you this afternoon. I genuinely wish you to become pregnant today." I stopped breathing. "Don and I want another child. I would love for all 3 of my kids to share the same father." My mind spun so violently I thought I might pass out. Hasn't Don ever felt suspicious about us? Doesn't he ever wonder why the kids don't resemble him at all? Is he stupid or something? I gripped the edge of the nightstand so hard my fingers went numb. "Don't speak that way about Don. He's not stupid. I've never given him a reason to doubt my faithfulness." Faithfulness? Faithfulness? How could she say those words while she was sleeping with another man? While she was plotting to pass his child off as mine? Then came his smug, disgusting laugh. "Well, I still don't understand how you slipped the kids past him. Luckily, Stevie Jr. and Lori both resemble me, so there's no reason for him to be suspicious." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. "Well, perhaps today I'll give you a child that resembles me and exposes your secret. Then he'll divorce you, and you can marry me." Silence. Then Carla's voice, stern, serious. "Stop talking about all this, Steve. I care deeply for Don and don't want to see him hurt. What you and I share is merely passionate fun, and that's all it will ever be between us." The room felt like it was spinning. What they shared. Passionate fun? That's all I was to her? A fool? A placeholder while she entertained herself with another man? Then came the unmistakable sounds of their betrayal. I yanked the headphones from my ears, shoved the recorder aside, and stumbled toward the bathroom. I barely made it to the sink before my stomach gave out. I vomited until there was nothing left inside me, then dry heaved until my ribs ached. Then I just stood there, gripping the counter, staring at my reflection. A broken man. A fool. Everything I thought I had, love, trust, family, my own children, was a lie. Locking down the truth. I knew I needed proof. Whatever came next, divorce, confrontation, custody battles, whatever, I couldn't risk losing control of the truth. I forced myself to move, to act. The recorder had a dual tape system. I inserted a blank cassette and started duplicating the evidence. Once it was done, I placed the copy in a plain envelope and locked it inside my car's trunk. No matter what happened next, I had that tape. Next, I wiped the original tape. I carefully rewound it to where Carla and I had been laughing about our snoring and erased everything that followed. If she ever got suspicious and tried to check, she'd hear nothing. And that would buy me time, gathering the pieces. I needed to know everything. How long had this been going on? Who exactly was Steve? And most importantly, were my children mine? I started at the beginning. I thought back to when I first met Carla, how our relationship started, the people she surrounded herself with. Then I remembered her high school yearbooks. I hurried down to the basement, rummaging through old boxes until I found what I was looking for. Her senior yearbook. I grabbed mine too, just in case. Then I carefully put the boxes back exactly as they were to avoid suspicion. Both yearbooks went straight into my car's trunk, right next to the envelope with the tape. If I was going to expose this lie, I needed every piece of the puzzle. Creating the cover story. There was no way I could face Carla that night. If she looked into my eyes, she'd know. And I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed time. I picked up my phone and called my boss, Jim. Jim and I had worked together for years. He was more than just a boss. He was a friend. And right now, I needed a friend. I told him everything. Every single detail. When I was finished, there was a long silence. Then he said, "Jesus Christ, Don." I exhaled sharply. "I need time to figure things out. Can you cover for me?" "Of course." "Say the word. What do you need?" "Give me an excuse to disappear for a few days. A training course. Something that won't make Carla suspicious." He thought for a moment. "We've got an anti-terrorism school in New York. I'll put your name on the roster. Short notice, but it won't raise any red flags." "Perfect. You sure you're going to be okay?" I wasn't sure about anything anymore. "I'll figure it out." The beginning of the end. I hung up, sat on the bed, and let out a long, slow breath. I had the tape. I had the yearbooks. I had a cover story. Now I just had to put the rest of the pieces together. Because soon, very soon, Carla was going to realize her perfect little game was over. And when that moment came, I was going to destroy the illusion she had built. The investigation begins. I knew what I had to do. Everything was falling into place, and now I needed to execute the next phase of my plan. With urgency, I dialed Carla's number and told her I had been assigned to a last-minute work trip. Jim, my boss, had asked me to fly out immediately, and I wouldn't have time for a long conversation. I dropped the kids off at Judy's. I explained casually. "She'll watch them until you get home." She wasn't thrilled. Her voice had that usual edge whenever something inconvenienced her. But there wasn't much she could do about it. I kept my tone neutral, my words measured, careful not to give anything away. "I'll call you when I know more," I added. She sighed but didn't argue. "I love you, Don," she said. I hesitated. For the first time in over 8 years, I couldn't say it back. I hung up instead, a plan in motion. Before I could leave, I had one more thing to do. I needed proof. Not just of the affair. I had that already. But proof of something deeper. Something that had been haunting me ever since I heard Carla's words on that recording. Hasn't Don ever felt suspicious about us? Doesn't he ever wonder why the kids don't resemble him at all? Luckily, Stevie Jr. and Lori both resemble me, so there's no reason for him to be suspicious. I clenched my jaw. No, I wouldn't let myself believe it. Not yet. I needed hard facts, and there was only one way to get them. At home, before heading out, I retrieved Q-tip swabs and quietly collected saliva samples from both Steve and Lori. They didn't question it, just giggled as I told them I was doing a science experiment. In reality, I was about to confirm my worst fear. I placed the samples in a sealed bag and packed a suitcase for my so-called trip. Then, I drove the kids back to Judy's, thanking her again for watching them. She smiled warmly. "No problem at all, Don. Take care of what you need to." If only she knew. With that, I was gone, escaping to plan my next move. I didn't go to the airport. Instead, I drove to Harvey, a suburb far enough from Chicago Heights to avoid running into Carla's family, but still close enough for me to move around without suspicion. I checked into a nondescript hotel, paid in cash, and locked the door behind me. Then, I did the only thing I could to shut out the pain. I bought a six-pack of beer and drank until I couldn't think anymore. I didn't want to relive the betrayal over and over in my head. I just wanted silence. The next morning, I woke up feeling like hell. It was already past 11 a.m., and my body felt like it had been run over by a truck. My head pounded. My stomach churned. I didn't want to move, so I did the only thing that made sense. I drank more. A couple more beers, and somehow it worked. When I woke again, it was 3 p.m., and I actually felt functional. I forced myself to shower, put on fresh clothes, and order coffee and toast from room service. When the coffee hit my system, my mind started working again. Now came the real question. What was I going to do next? Checking the messages. I pulled out my phone and saw 3 missed calls. The first 2 were from Carla. The first message was annoyed. "Don, why haven't you called me? I don't even know if you landed yet. Call me when you get this." The second message? "Pure Anja. Don, I've been trying to reach you all night. Why are you ignoring me? What the hell is going on?" I almost laughed. The irony of her being upset about me disappearing was almost too much to handle. What was she going to do? Cheat on me? Too late for that. But the third call was from Jim. I played the voicemail. "Hey, buddy. Carla called me." I sighed. Of course she did. She was demanding to know where you were, why you weren't answering, what's going on. I told her the same thing I told you. This was a last-minute assignment. I don't even know where they put you up. She wasn't happy, but I don't think she could do much about it. You owe me for this one. I smirked. Yeah, I owed him big time. Jim had kept my cover intact. Carla could try all she wanted to track me down, but even if she called airport security at JFK, it would be impossible to find me. I had time to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. The investigation begins. I sat down, opened my laptop, and got to work. I started by making a checklist. Heavy checkmark, everything I already knew. Heavy checkmark, everything I needed to know. Heavy checkmark, every detail that could connect the dots. Then, I grabbed Carla's high school yearbook, the one I had taken from the basement before leaving. I started listing every person who had written in her junior and senior yearbooks, cross-referencing them by class year. Then, I called her high school. "Hi, I'm looking for information on upcoming reunions." My wife attended there, and I was hoping to get some details. The administrative assistant was surprisingly helpful. "We actually have a 5-year reunion book available if you'd like a copy." "Perfect. That would be great. Do you happen to have the 10-year reunion book as well?" She paused. "Actually, yes. It's coming out soon, but I can send you a digital copy now if you'd like." "Bingo. That would be fantastic. Can you email it to me?" 5 minutes later, I had a gold mine of information. The most up-to-date list I could have hoped for. Heavy checkmark names. Heavy checkmark married names. Heavy checkmark spouses. Heavy checkmark addresses. Heavy checkmark phone numbers. Even ridiculous details, children's names, pets, hobbies, favorite foods. And then I found something that made my stomach twist. Carla's submission. She had listed our current information. Under children, she had included Steve and Lori. And at the bottom, a footnote. Hopefully, number 3 will be on the way soon. I gritted my teeth. She was planning to pass off another man's child as mine. I clenched my fists, my breath slow and steady. The rage was there, but so was the calm. I knew exactly what needed to happen next. Because once I had all the proof, there would be no coming back from this. The web of lies. The call I didn't want to make. I knew I couldn't avoid talking to Carla forever. Eventually, she'd get suspicious, though Ironically, not for the reason she should have been. She'd be mad that I hadn't called. Not because she missed me, but because she wanted control. Fine. Let her be mad. I dialed her number, bracing myself for the inevitable. The second she answered, she went off. Where the hell have you been? Why didn't you return my calls last night? Or this morning? What the hell is going on, Dawn? I held the phone away from my ear, letting her rant. I knew she needed to get it all out. When she finally paused to breathe, I spoke. I got in late, I said, my voice deliberately tired. I didn't want to wake the kids, and honestly, I had a rough night. I ended up drinking more than I should have, then slept in too late to call this morning. There. Let her chew on that for a moment. I could almost hear her brain working through my words. She wasn't happy, but at least I'd given her something believable. And where are you staying? I was at the Hilton Garden at JFK last night. I lied. But it was only for one night. I had to find another place for the rest of the trip. Just keep calling my cell. It's the best way to reach me. But I won't have it on during class hours. That last part was critical. It gave me a built-in excuse to ignore her for hours at a time. She sighed, clearly still frustrated. Fine. But call me when you can, okay? Of course. I hung up before she could drag the conversation on any longer. And just like that, I had my perfect window of time. Setting the trap. The next step? An untraceable phone. I headed to a nearby pharmacy and picked up a disposable track phone. Cheap, simple, and perfect for what I had in mind. By the time I got back to the hotel, it was already 6 p.m., and surprisingly, I was feeling pretty good. The hunger hit me, so I stopped at George's Rib House to grab something to eat. Then I got back to work. The yearbook investigation. I laid Carla's high school yearbook out in front of me, flipping through it page by page, person by person. Every handwritten note, every signature, every message. I started creating a list of everyone who had written something in her senior yearbook, typing out their comments and categorizing them with a code system. Heavy checkmark M or FM, male or female. Heavy checkmark friend, seemed to be just a friend. Heavy checkmark girlfriend, close female friend. Heavy checkmark boyfriend. Any male who wrote an intimate or suggestive note. Heavy checkmark non-friend. Anyone who wrote something negative. By the time I finished, I had a list of about 40 names. Heavy checkmark 30 female classmates, friends, close friends, and a couple of non-friends. Heavy checkmark 10 male classmates, including 5 past boyfriends. One name stood out immediately. Steve Wilson. The same Steve from the recording. The same Steve who had just mocked me for not knowing my own kids weren't mine. I clenched my jaw. He was the prime suspect. But I needed more proof before I jumped to conclusions. There was one other promising lead, a non-friend named Gil Roberts. Maybe he had history with Carla. Maybe he hated Steve. Either way, if he had a reason to dislike either of them, he might be willing to talk. I highlighted his name. On the female side, there were 3 girlfriends who had been bridesmaids at our wedding. That meant they were still close to Carla, so I had to be careful about what I said around them. But the 2 female non-friends? They might have something interesting to share. People tend to spill secrets when they don't like someone. And I was counting on that. Building the full picture. Next, I cross-referenced my list with the reunion booklet I had received earlier. Heavy checkmark married names. Heavy checkmark addresses. Heavy checkmark phone numbers. Heavy checkmark spouses. Heavy checkmark children's names. Heavy checkmark hobbies, interests, and even workplaces. It was a goldmine of information. And then I found something that made my blood run cold. Carla's personal submission for the reunion booklet. She had listed our 2 kids. And beneath it, a footnote. Hopefully, number 3 will be on the way soon. My fingers curled into fists. She was planning to give that bastard another child and still pass it off as mine. I took a slow, measured breath. My mind was clear now. The rage was still there, but controlled, directed. I knew exactly what needed to happen next. The late-night call. By the time I finished my research, it was past 10 p.m. I had been at this for hours, and my body felt heavy with exhaustion. I was about to get into bed when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Carla. Of course. I sighed and answered. Hi, Don. I thought maybe you'd call me tonight after getting settled. I did consider it, I said, keeping my voice neutral. But the last time I called, you gave me an earful. Figured I'd wait and see if you wanted to talk to me instead. A pause. Then, I'm sorry I got snippy with you earlier, she said, her voice softer now. I was just upset because I couldn't reach you. This whole trip of yours seems a bit strange, and I guess I was feeling insecure. Will you forgive me? I let out a slow breath. That doesn't exactly sound like forgiveness, honey, she pressed. I smirked. Well, maybe I'm a little ticked off myself, considering how you've treated me. Silence. For a moment, I wondered if she suspected something. If, deep down, she could feel the shift. Could feel me pulling away. But she didn't say anything. Not yet. And I wasn't going to make it easy for her. I wasn't the fool she thought I was. Not anymore. The truth spreads like fire. A hollow goodbye. For a moment, I wondered if Carla sensed something was off. Did she know I was pulling away? Did she feel the distance growing between us? I didn't really care. I wasn't sure if she was reflecting on the things that had destroyed our marriage, but I hoped, somewhere deep inside, that maybe she was. Finally, she sighed. Well, I guess I'll let you go then. Don, I'm sorry. I love you. I closed my eyes. I'm sorry too. Good night, Carla. I ended the call before she could say anything else. That night, for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to listen to her snoring. But instead of relief, I felt something unexpected. Sadness. I remembered the way she had laughed when she first heard her snoring on the recorder, how embarrassed she had been, how we had ended up wrapped in each other's arms, making love that morning. And now, that warmth was gone. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my chest hollow. The memory of what happened afterward, and what might never happen again, settled in my heart like a heavy stone. I finally drifted off to sleep, but it was restless, hunting for the truth. The next morning, I was back to business. I grabbed my disposable track phone and started making anonymous calls. I introduced myself as Roger Moore from Homeland Security, a fake identity I had crafted specifically for this. I explained that I was conducting a background check on Don Phillips, a potential recruit for the Chicago Anti-Terrorism Task Force. I understand that Mr. Phillips is married to a woman named Carla. Do you recall knowing her in high school? One by one, I called Carla's former classmates, focusing first on her female friends. I asked subtle questions about her past relationships and associations, acting like I was simply verifying personal history. And then I got confirmation. Steve Wilson had been Carla's high school boyfriend. They had dated for about 3 years, and she had broken things off a few months after graduating. But that wasn't all. Steve still lived in Chicago Heights. He worked at Chase Manhattan Bank, the same bank where Carla had worked before we moved to Des Plaines. And, most importantly, Steve had recently gone through a divorce. He had 2 children, both boys. I clenched my jaw. I dug into the reunion booklet, searching for his entry. There he was, handsome, confident, smiling. It wasn't hard to see why a woman would fall for him. But Carla had chosen me. She had given herself to me. And yet she had kept him in her life. She had let him father our children. The why was still a mystery. Would she ever give me an honest answer? Or would she just keep lying? A new source, the enemy's perspective. I had gotten enough information from Carla's friends. They were too loyal to her to tell me anything damaging. So I switched tactics. It was time to talk to her enemies. I called Jill Johnson Marker, a female non-friend from Carla's high school days. I kept my Roger Moore cover and explained that I was checking Carla Peterson's background as part of a national security clearance review for Don Phillips. The moment I said Carla's name, Jill let loose with both barrels. Oh my God, that woman is a nightmare. I don't know why you'd ever trust someone like her with national security. I kept my tone calm. Why do you say that? Because she's a cheater and a boyfriend stealer. Always has been. I felt my pulse quicken. Can you explain? My sophomore year, I was dating Steve Wilson. Carla took him from me. She knew we were together. She didn't care. She went after him anyway. Yeah, okay, it's not illegal, but it tells you exactly the kind of person she is. I gritted my teeth. Did anything happen later that confirmed your suspicions about her character? She snorted. Oh, you have no idea. Once she married her husband. What's his name? Don. The rumors started. People said she was seeing Steve again while they both worked at the bank. Rumors? I pushed. Well, actually, Steve himself was the one bragging about it. He would tell people they were back together, that they never really stopped seeing each other. And when she had kids, He told everyone they were his. The world blurred for a moment. I forced myself to breathe evenly. Are you sure about this? Positive. And here's the real kicker. Steve's been bragging again recently. He's telling people she's pregnant again. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. So Steve thought she was pregnant now? I swallowed hard, keeping my voice steady. Do you know anyone else who can confirm this? Yeah, talk to Steve's ex-wife. She left him because of those rumors. I sat up straight. Do you have her number? Sure do. Jill rattled off the number, and I scribbled it down, my mind racing. Steve's ex-wife. The woman who had lived on the other side of the betrayal. If anyone knew the truth, it was her. The puzzle pieces start to fit. I leaned back, staring at my notes. Heavy checkmark Steve Wilson, Carla's high school boyfriend. Heavy checkmark dated for 3 years, broke up shortly after graduation. Heavy checkmark worked with Carla at the bank for years before we moved. Heavy checkmark rumored to have rekindled a relationship while married to me. Heavy checkmark told people Carla's kids were his. Heavy checkmark recently divorced, claimed Carla was pregnant again. It was all lining up. But now, I had a direct line to someone who could confirm everything. Steve's ex-wife. The woman who had already confronted him. I stared at my phone. I had the number, and I was about to hear the truth from the other side. Carla had spent years keeping secrets from me. Now, I was about to expose them all. The final pieces of the puzzle. A cold realization. I had almost everything I needed. The picture was becoming clearer and uglier with each new revelation. One of the last calls I made was to the male non-friend from Carla's past, a man who had been in love with her throughout high school, but had never stood a chance. He told me something that made my stomach turn. Carla always claimed she loved Steve, but she said she wouldn't marry him. Said he was too self-absorbed. But she also told him she would only give her virginity to her future husband. After that, maybe she'd consider being with Steve for old time's sake. The guy hesitated before adding, "That's what killed me, man. I wanted to be your future husband." I thought she meant what she said. But when I heard her talk about Steve like that, I realized she'd never be faithful. Not to me. Not to anyone. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. So you think if Steve had pursued her again, she would have let him back in? He laughed bitterly. Of course. That was always the plan, wasn't it? A fresh wave of disgust washed over me. Carla had been planning to betray me before we even got married. I felt sick. Sick with rage. Sick with the knowledge that I had never stood a chance. A face-to-face encounter with Steve. I had gathered nearly all the information I needed. But there was one last thing I wanted to do. I needed to see Steve Wilson in person. I wasn't going to reveal my identity. I just wanted to observe him, to look into the eyes of the man who had stolen my family. I drove to Chase Manhattan Bank, walked inside, and casually made my way toward the loan office. And there he was, tall, athletic, confident. The same man from the photos in the yearbook. The man who had mocked me on that tape, laughing about how I never even questioned why my kids didn't look like me. I clenched my fists. If he had been a better man, I might have admitted that he was a good-looking guy, someone who could turn heads. But none of that mattered, because all I saw was a snake. I stood there for a moment, watching him interact with customers, pretending to be a professional. And then I turned and walked out. I had seen enough. The final test, DNA. I checked into the Candlewood Suites extended stay hotel, just outside the airport. At 8:30 p.m., I called Carla. "I'll be home around noon tomorrow," I told her. "Maybe you can take the afternoon off. We could spend some time together." She sounded relieved. "That sounds wonderful, honey. I miss you." I smiled to myself, knowing what was coming. "I miss you too. Everything's going to work out just fine." For the first time in years, I lied to my wife, and it didn't bother me one bit. She had lied to me for years. A few lies of my own wouldn't hurt. I slept well that night, opening the results. The next morning before heading home, I stopped by my office to meet Jim. He was eager to hear what I had uncovered. I told him everything. His face darkened with every detail. "Jesus, Don," he muttered. Then he handed me a sealed, overnight envelope from the DNA lab. I ripped it open, my hands ice cold. "Dear Mr. Phillips, we have completed testing on all 5 samples you provided on Wednesday, November 15th. Sample 1 is a male and is a full sibling to Sample 2. also a male. Sample 3 is a male and is a full sibling to sample 4, a female. Samples 1 and 2 share the same father, but have a different mother than samples 3 and 4. As for sample 5, which we know belongs to you, Mr. Phillips, there is no biological relationship between your DNA and any of the 4 children represented in this test. In other words, there is no DNA evidence to indicate that you are the biological father of any of the children. Sincerely, Dr. David Rafey, Ph.D. Accurate DNA Labs, Inc. I felt a tightness in my chest, a suffocating pressure that threatened to crush me. Not a single one of my children was mine. Carla had stolen everything from me. Jim let out a slow breath. I'm so damn sorry, Don. I nodded, unable to speak. He hugged me, a rare moment of support between 2 men who rarely showed emotion. If you need anything, I've got your back. Thanks, Jim. For the first time in my life, I had no idea what came next. But I knew one thing. Carla was about to pay for what she had done. The confrontation. I had gathered. Heavy checkmark the original tape recording. Heavy checkmark statements from Carla's former classmates. Heavy checkmark a sworn statement from Steve's ex-wife. Heavy checkmark a certified letter from the DNA lab. Heavy checkmark my aching, shattered heart. I drove home. I arrived a few minutes before noon, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat down in the family room. I waited. At exactly 12:03 p.m., I heard the garage door open. Carla walked in, her heels clicking against the floor, her perfume filling the air. She spotted me and hurried over, her arms reaching out for a hug and a kiss. I stepped back. She froze, confusion flashing across her face. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice cautious. I looked her dead in the eyes. "Do you want a beer?" I asked. Her brow furrowed. "No, just tell me what's wrong." I took a slow sip of my beer. Then I set the bottle down, and I pulled the envelope from my pocket. Everything inside this envelope was about to destroy her world. And the best part? She had built the entire thing herself. The confrontation, laying down the truth. I took a slow breath, steadying myself before speaking. "Carla, I know you've been having an affair." Her mouth opened, ready to deny, to deflect, to lie. I raised my hand, stopping her before she could even start. "I don't want to hear a word from you right now," I said, my voice firm, unwavering. "I have evidence. That means I have no reason to believe anything you say. So don't waste your breath lying to me." Her lips pressed together, her face turning ghostly pale. "Don't talk. Don't cry. Don't deny. And don't apologize," I continued. "Right now, none of that matters. Just sit down and listen." Fear flickered in her eyes. I had never spoken to her like this before. She knew. She knew her world was about to collapse. I gestured toward the couch. "See." She hesitated, then obeyed. "Do you want a beer?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. She shook her head, her throat working as she swallowed. "Just water." I poured her a glass, set it in front of her, then pulled up a chair and sat across from her, locking my gaze onto hers. "I want you to listen carefully," I said. "I know you've been having an affair. I have more than enough proof. I'm not making accusations. I am telling you a fact. And I want you to understand something. From this moment forward, your lies don't matter. I know the truth. It's in your best interest to accept that." She gripped the water glass tightly, knuckles turning white. "If you doubt me," I warned, "you'll make mistakes. And you won't like the consequences." I let my words sink in before delivering the final blow. Here's what's going to happen next. The 1-month separation. Today, I'm leaving this house. Her breath hitched. I'll be packing up everything I need for the next month. During that time, I won't be living here. We'll still be legally married, but I won't be residing under this roof. A small, wounded sound escaped her lips. She gasped, her body trembling, but she didn't cry. She didn't speak. "Not yet. During this month, you have 2 things to do," I continued, my voice void of emotion. "First, you need to decide if you love me. If you truly want to remain my wife. That's your decision to make. But I don't want to hear your answer today. Take your time and think about it. In exactly 1 month, you can tell me your decision." She nodded weakly, her hands gripping the glass like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Second, I said, leaning forward slightly, you need to put everything in writing. Her head snapped up. All of it, every single detail of your betrayal. She sucked in a sharp breath, eyes wide with panic. Carla, I love the woman I married, but I don't love the woman sitting in front of me right now, because I don't know who you are anymore. Her lips parted as if to protest, but one look from me silenced her. I want to know the real you, I said. The woman you became behind my back. So, in writing, I want every detail of your affair or affairs. If it was just one person, I want his name. If there were more, I want all their names. Tears pooled in her eyes. I want to know why you did it. What they gave you that I couldn't. When it started. How often it happened. Where it happened. What you said. What you did. Her breathing turned shallow. I want to know what you gained from this. What you felt. Why you kept doing it. She shook her head slowly, a silent plea forming on her lips. I ignored it. Carla, I have concrete evidence, I said coldly. So, don't even think about lying. If you leave anything out, if I find out you're deceiving me one more time, this marriage is over. No second chances. A single tear slipped down her cheek. If you tell me everything, there's a chance we can salvage this, I continued. A chance, not a promise. Don't read more into it than that. She nodded again, barely able to hold my gaze. I could see the panic building inside her, the stark realization of just how deep in trouble she was. If you can't or won't tell me the truth, let me know by the end of the month, and we'll end this marriage swiftly and painlessly. Silence stretched between us. The weight of my words settled heavily on her shoulders. Right now, the ball is in your court, I said. You have all the decisions to make. The rules for the next month. When you're ready to tell me your decision and send me your written confession, you can email it to my work account. Not before, not after. Exactly 4 weeks from today. I'll let that sink in before continuing. And one more thing. I leaned in, my voice turning sharp as a blade. If I ever find out that you've resumed your affair, even once, our marriage ends immediately. No discussion. No hesitation. No merci. Carla flinched. She understood. Now, I said, finally shifting to the last piece of business. The kids. She blinked, as if remembering them for the first time in this conversation. Do you want them with you for the next month, or would you prefer I take them? Her lips trembled. I don't know. Figure it out before I leave, I said. If you keep them, I'll visit them every Wednesday night. I'll pick them up from the babysitter and have them until 8:30 p.m. before bringing them home. I'll call when I arrive so you can get them. She nodded numbly. On weekends, I'll take them for one of the 2 days. You decide which one. I'll stick to the schedule you choose. She opened her mouth, hesitated, then whispered, I want them. Fine, I said. If you change your mind, let me know before I leave. I stood up. I'm going to start packing now. She sat completely still, watching me like a woman who had just realized the foundation beneath her life was crumbling. She had thought she could get away with it. She had thought she was smarter than me. She had thought she could lie forever. She was wrong. And now, she was finally paying the price. The month of separation and Carla's confession. Walking away, I packed my bags upstairs, trying to drown out the sound of Carla sobbing downstairs. I should have felt some satisfaction, should have felt vindicated. But all I felt was emptiness. When I returned, she had regained some composure, though her red, swollen eyes and smudged makeup betrayed her earlier breakdown. Dawn, I know you don't want to hear this. You're right. I cut her off coldly. I don't want to hear it. Follow my instructions, or we can end this fraudulent marriage right now. Her shoulders shook, but she nodded weakly. Do you want to keep the kids with you, or should I take them? I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. I want them with me, she choked out, barely holding herself together. Okay, then I'm leaving. I grabbed my bags and walked toward the door. I'll call you tomorrow to discuss the schedule for picking up the kids on Wednesdays and 1 day each weekend. I paused just before stepping out. Goodbye, Carla. I didn't wait for a response. I walked out the door, and for the first time in over 8 years, I felt free. A month in limbo. The month passed quickly. Every Wednesday, I took Steve and Lori out for dinner, then brought them back to my hotel suite. Lori, being so young, didn't seem to understand much. But Steve? Steve sensed something was off. "Dad, why aren't you at home?" he asked one night. I chose my words carefully. "Your mom and I are working through some things." I told him. "It's best if I stay away for a little while. But don't worry. We both love you and Lori very much." He seemed to accept my answer and didn't ask again. Every weekend, I dropped them off at the house. Every time, Carla came to the door to greet them. And every time, she watched me leave, tears streaming down her face. Once, she even started walking toward my car, desperation in her eyes. I simply held up my hand, stopping her in her tracks, and drove away. She remained standing in the doorway, motionless, watching me disappear. Carla's letter. Exactly 1 month to the day after our confrontation, I received an email from Carla. Subject: "Please read this, Don. Dear Don, I want you to know that I am deeply sorry for the pain you've endured. I love you, and I want to be your wife. Please call me after reading my letter. Please decide to come back to me. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I need you, and your children need you. Love, Carla." Even before opening the attachment, I already knew Carla wouldn't be completely honest. She wouldn't admit that Steve and Lori weren't my children. She wouldn't confess to the depth of her betrayal. But I still had to read the letter, if only to confirm what I already suspected. I clicked the attachment. It was long, and it started exactly how I expected. Carla's confession. "Dear Don, I am writing this letter to persuade you to return to me. I love you deeply and want to continue being your wife. But what I have to tell you is complicated. I know it will hurt you, and I never wanted that. But I am committed to being completely honest with you. I have to tell you the truth. I love 2 men, you and Steve Wilson. You said I was having an affair, and by most definitions, I suppose I was. But I didn't see it that way. An affair is usually a short-lived infatuation, a moment of weakness. But my relationship with Steve dates back long before I met you. You know I was involved with someone else when we met. That someone else was Steve Wilson. We had been dating since my sophomore year. Steve was handsome, charming, witty, intelligent, and caring. He had everything a girl could hope for. And I loved him, Don. But he had one fatal flaw. He was too attractive, too confident. I knew he wouldn't stay faithful as a husband. So even though I loved him, I knew I could never marry him. I was determined to preserve my virginity for my future husband. He pushed me for more, but I held my ground. And then, I met you. The first betrayal. When I met you, Don, I realized you were different. You were kind, reliable, a man I could trust, and I fell in love with you. But the truth is, I never stopped loving Steve. I loved you both, differently, yet similarly. And Steve never stopped pursuing me. Even after I started dating you, he kept pushing. He knew I planned to save myself for my future husband. So I once joked that maybe after I lost my virginity, I would consider being with him for old time's sake. He never forgot that comment. And then, the night we made love for the first time, something changed. Steve knew, and he wanted what I had once promised. And, Don, I gave in. The truth about our children. I wish I could say I regret it. I wish I could say I didn't want it. But I did. I wanted him just as much as I wanted you. And that's when everything changed. I became pregnant, and I knew the baby was Steve's, not yours. But I also knew I wanted to be with you, not him. And so, I lied to you. I let you believe the baby was yours. I married you, carried Steve's child, and never told you the truth. And then years later, I did it again. The final betrayal. Don, I know I betrayed your trust. I know I have hurt you more than I can ever undo. But I am begging you, please find a way to forgive me. I love you. I never stopped loving you. I don't expect you to understand, but I needed you both. But now, I know who I truly want. And that's you, Don. Please, come home. My response. I stared at the letter, my hands trembling slightly. Not from sadness. Not from regret. Not even from rage. Just emptiness. I had expected a confession, but I hadn't expected her to justify it. She wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was sorry for getting caught. And as I sat there, staring at those words, I realized something. I would never forgive her, and I would never go home again. The final confession and the reckoning. Carla's last betrayal. Her letter continued, each word cutting deeper than the last. Dawn, you never questioned Steve's paternity because you were the one who took my virginity. Little Steve looked like me, so there was never any doubt. But I didn't stop seeing Steve after we married. Even after you became my husband, he and I continued to meet once a month, sometimes every other month. I loved you both. You were an amazing husband. You were a perfect father. And every single day, my love for you grew stronger, even if I knew I didn't deserve you. But Dawn, my love for Steve never faded either. A web of lies. For years, I watched you closely, almost hoping you would cheat on me. That way, I could justify what I was doing. But you never did. You were faithful. You were devoted. You were everything a woman could ever want in a husband. And yet, I still betrayed you. I know I'm dragging this out, but you wanted honesty, and I'm giving it to you. So here it is, every detail. The details of the affair. Who? Steve Wilson. Why? Because I loved him. Where? His home. My car. Hotels. Motels. Sometimes even parks or restaurants. When? Once a month. Maybe more, maybe less. I don't remember all the dates, but it never stopped. Well, we did. Everything. Things you and I never did. I didn't always want to, but I let him because our time together was so limited. And Dawn, Steve loved me too. At least as much as someone like him could love a woman. Even after he married someone else, we continued our relationship. His wife found out, and that's why they divorced. But he never stopped asking me to leave you and be with him. I refused. I told him I would never divorce you, because I knew what kind of man he was. And somehow, it never occurred to me that the standards I expected in a husband were so much higher than the ones I upheld as a wife. And Dawn, I regret that more than anything, the final betrayal. I know this is already too much, but there are two more things you need to know. First, Steve is also Lori's father. And Dawn, I'm pregnant. I'm fairly certain it happened the last time Steve and I were together. Which means all three of our children are biologically Steve's. I thought it would be best if they were all true biological siblings. I wanted them to have the same father. And yet, Dawn, you are their real father. You are the only father they have ever known. The only one who ever loved them. Steve doesn't want them. I don't want him to have them. I want you. And I am so sorry for everything I've done to you. If I could undo it all, I would. I am begging you, please come home. I know I haven't answered all of your questions, but I will. I promise. Just please, Dawn, give me a chance. I'll be waiting for your call. Love, Carla. The call before the storm. The next day, Friday, I called Carla. I'll be coming home tomorrow morning, I told her. Take the day off. Drop the kids off at the babysitter. We need to talk. She agreed immediately, her voice trembling with hope and relief. Dawn, what are you thinking? Please, just tell me. You'll find out tomorrow. I ended the call, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. The reckoning. The next morning, I walked into our house. Carla was waiting in the kitchen, nervously clutching a cup of coffee. She beamed when she saw me. I made you some coffee, she said softly, offering it to me. I took it, not because I wanted coffee, because I wanted her to think she had a chance. Let's sit at the table, I told her. She nodded eagerly, sitting across from me. I opened my briefcase and placed a thick stack of paperwork and files on the table between us. Her smile faltered. I looked her in the eye. Carla, this is my evidence. She froze. It starts with this audio tape, I said, tapping the cassette on top of the stack. From this, I discovered several things. I listed them one by one. Heavy check mark, you were having an affair with Steve Wilson. Heavy check mark, this affair had been ongoing since before we got married. Heavy check mark, neither of our two children are biologically mine. Heavy check mark, you plan on getting pregnant by him again, so I would be raising a third child for both of you. Heavy check mark, you claim to love me and didn't want to leave me for him. Carla gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Her entire body shook as the weight of my words sank in. How? She choked out, her voice barely a whisper. I smirked. If you're wondering where the tape came from, it's from the voice recorder we used to record our snoring, I said. Her eyes widened in horror. I erased everything but the snoring, I continued, to keep you from realizing that you had been exposed. Her face crumbled. She suddenly looked so small, so fragile, so broken. But I felt nothing. Not sympathy, not regret, not even anger anymore. Just cold, detached finality. Because now, there was nothing left to say. She had destroyed everything. And now it was time for me to walk away for good. The final judgment. Unveiling the truth. I exhaled slowly, leveling my gaze at Carla. I didn't go to New York, I said, my voice even. Her eyes widened. I went to Chicago Heights to investigate your past, to find out who Steve was, and to learn the truth about my children. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't say a word. That's why you couldn't locate me in New York, I continued. Because I was never there. I watched the realization dawn on her. She knew what was coming. When I discovered the truth about you, I didn't want to see or talk to you again, I admitted. Then I opened my briefcase. I placed a stack of high school yearbooks on the table in front of her. I thought the best place to start would be your yearbooks, I explained. I compiled a list of everyone who wrote in them, then categorized them based on their connection to you. I set my cross-reference list on top of the yearbooks and pulled out another folder. Then, I reached out to your school's administration, I said. They sent me the upcoming class reunion booklet. It helped me track down the current names, addresses, and phone numbers of your former classmates. Her breathing became shallow. I contacted several of them. Jill Johnson Marker, Steve's ex-wife's sister, and even a guy who had a crush on you in high school. Carla flinched. He told me he stopped loving you when he found out you had planned to cheat on me with Steve even before we got married. She closed her eyes as if willing herself to disappear. Many people in our hometown know about your actions, Carla, I said, my tone turning sharper. I don't know how you ever believed Steve would keep quiet about it. Her eyes snapped open, full of dread. After all, I said, leaning back slightly, he was just as involved in this as you were. The DNA evidence. I reached for the next folder and set it on the table. This, I said, is a letter from the DNA lab. She stared at it, not daring to touch it. It confirms that I am not the father of our 2 children. Carla gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. I also met with Steve's ex-wife, I continued. She allowed me to take DNA samples from her 2 kids. I flipped the folder open, tapping the official results inside. This document proves that Steve and Lori are half-siblings to Steve Wilson's 2 children. Carla visibly recoiled, tears welling in her eyes. And here, I said, laying down another certified letter, is a signed statement from Steve's ex-wife, confirming that she willingly provided these samples. Carla covered her mouth, her entire body trembling. It's all here, Carla, I said. Everything you tried to hide from me. The final blow. I reached for one last folder in my briefcase. This, I said, is all the evidence I have right now. Her tear-streaked face lifted, her expression pleading. But I could find more if I tried, I added. Hotel receipts, clothes with traces of bodily fluids, articles of clothing or gifts he gave you, maybe even eyewitnesses. Her lips quivered, but she didn't speak. I don't need to though, do I? I asked. She shook her head weakly. No, she whispered. Good, I said. Because I don't enjoy knowing these things. And I don't need to hear them from you either. I exhaled, my voice growing colder. Your letter already confirmed everything I suspected, I said. And I appreciate your honesty for once in your life. Carla flinched as if my words had physically struck her. I loved you with all my heart, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I gave everything I had to this marriage. I believed you did the same. I believed we were happy. I leaned forward. But now I see that this entire marriage, this entire life, was built on lies. And if our foundation was deception, then our marriage itself was never real. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she shook her head furiously. No, Don, please, it was real. I swear my love for you was real. I let her words hang in the air for a moment. Then I opened the last file on the table. The divorce papers. Carla. Her bloodshot eyes lifted to meet mine. These are divorce papers. Her face crumbled into sheer panic. I've already signed them, I continued. All that's left is for you to sign them, too. She shook her head violently, her hands clenching into fists. No, Don. No, please, I'll do anything. Don't do this. I ignored her, laying down another set of documents. These papers also grant me full custody of the children, including your unborn baby." Her breath hitched. For the first time in this entire confrontation, I saw true desperation in her eyes. And despite everything she had done to me, despite the years of betrayal, seeing her like that hurt me more than I ever expected. But I couldn't let that stop me. "I don't want this either," I admitted, my voice softer for the first time. "But I can't keep living in the mess you created." She gasped for air, struggling to breathe between heavy sobs. "Don, please," she started, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. "If you agree to all my terms, I won't leave immediately. I won't force you out." Her eyes flickered with hope. Then I crushed it. "But we will not be living as husband and wife." Her hope shattered into pieces. "Move your things into the spare bedroom," I ordered. "I'll be using the master bedroom from now on." Her head hung low, her shoulders trembling violently. Silence stretched between us, a suffocating, heavy silence that carried years of betrayal, deceit, and broken trust. I waited for her to speak, to fight, to beg, but she didn't, because she knew there was nothing left to save. The final terms and the aftermath. Laying down the law, I leaned forward, resting my hands on the stack of papers before me. "Steve is going to pay $2,000 per year for each child in child support," I said, my voice steady. Carla swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward the documents. "This money will be deposited into a trust account for each child until they turn 18, including the new baby." Her face paled further. "Steve made it clear that he was involved. That means he is responsible." I flipped through my calculations. "The total due right now is $330,000, $116,000 for Steven, and $88,000 for Lori in back payments, plus $2,000 each for the upcoming year." I saw Carla's jaw clench, but she didn't argue. She knew I was right. "On top of that," I continued, "he must acquire a fully paid life insurance policy worth $180,000, with the children as beneficiaries and you as the policy owner." Her eyes snapped up to meet mine. "That way, you'll be able to make any necessary changes," I clarified. "Once he fulfills his commitment for voluntary child support, the policy ownership will be transferred back to him." I let my words sink in before adding the final blow. "But if he fails to meet either of these requirements, I will make everything public and take legal action against him." Carla squeezed her eyes shut, a shudder running through her body. "These court-ordered payments will be deducted from his wages by his current and future employers," I said, my voice sharp. "And if that affects his career advancement, well, that's not my problem." I waited. She had nothing to say. "If he accepts my terms but fails to keep up with his future obligations, his life insurance benefits will provide for his children." I paused, then added coldly, "Interpret that however you wish." Carla stared at me, her expression unreadable. She knew there was no escape from this. "All of this will be conveyed to him in a formal letter from my attorney, along with copies of all the evidence I've gathered so far." Her final choice. I exhaled slowly, looking her dead in the eye. "You have two choices." Her lips trembled. "You are free to leave, right now, without the children. Just pack your bags and go." I let the silence stretch. Then I continued, "Or you can sign these papers and stay here with your children. But understand this. We won't be living as a married couple." She let out a soft whimper, her hands trembling on the table. "I don't see why you'd need an attorney," I said, "since your options are very limited. But if you want one, you have until Tuesday morning to get legal advice." Her face was ashen. "However," I added, my voice hardening, "if you refuse to sign these divorce and custody papers and attempt to leave with the children, I will track you down and take legal action." I leaned in slightly. "Regardless of what happened to our marriage, I will not lose my children. Neither they nor I deserve that. And I won't tolerate it. Period." Carla nodded weakly, wiping at her eyes. But I wasn't done. "There's one more condition," I said. She froze. "You will never see or communicate with Steve again." Her breath hitched. "If you do, and I find out, both of you will face severe consequences." She stared at me, her body completely rigid. "You've already lost me, Carla," I said, my voice dropping to barely a whisper. Now you'll lose him too. A silent tear slid down her cheek. Don't make a foolish move and lose your children as well. I slid the papers across the table. So, do you want to sign them now, or do you want to talk to an attorney? She didn't hesitate. I'll sign them now, she whispered. Her hand trembled as she picked up the pen. And just like that, it was done. The aftermath. I placed the signed papers in my briefcase, closing it with a click. I'm going to the bank to secure these in my safe deposit box, I told her. She nodded weakly. Move into the spare bedroom, I reminded her. Like we discussed. Her voice broke as she whispered, I will. I stood. Goodbye, Carla. I'll see you tomorrow. And then I left. A new reality. I moved back in the next day. Carla had relocated her belongings to the spare bedroom, just as I had instructed. On the surface, life moved forward as if nothing had changed. To outsiders, we looked normal. Heavy check mark, we ate together. Heavy check mark, we laughed with the children. Heavy check mark, we engaged in small talk. But beneath the facade, everything was different. There were no lingering touches, no shared glances, no marital words. Our bed, once a place of intimacy and love, was now just a cold, empty space. I avoided touching her, and I never let her touch me, living with the ghost of us. Nights became a battlefield of memories. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, contemplating what we had lost. Sometimes, I wished it was all just a nightmare, something I could wake up from and forget. But it wasn't, and it never would be. I heard her crying in the night, muffled sobs seeping through the walls. Years ago, I would have done anything to comfort her, to wipe away her pain. Now, I felt nothing. I had changed. I had become cold, detached, and I didn't care. Her last plea. For months, Carla tried to talk to me about her actions. She wanted to fix things, to find a way back to happiness. I shut her down every single time. There's nothing left to say, Carla. Each rejection sent her retreating into herself. Each time, I heard her crying in her room, breaking down over what she had done. But I never comforted her. I never reassured her. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it alone. The last betrayal, and the final child. One Friday morning, my phone rang. Carla's voice trembled on the other end. Don, I'm in labor. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone. A new child was about to enter the world. A child that was not mine. A child that I would never see as my own. But somehow, that didn't change the weight in my chest. Because despite everything, despite the betrayal, despite the lies, despite the wreckage of our marriage, this was still my life, and I didn't know how to walk away from it. The final betrayal and the deepest loss. A child born from betrayal, but loved anyway. When Carla went into labor, I rushed home to take her to the hospital. 3 hours later, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. I stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand as she endured the pain, standing by her side in the delivery room. For a moment, in that hospital, I felt like her husband again. And then reality hit me all over again. After the birth, Carla looked up at me, exhaustion in her eyes. What should we name her? She asked softly. I hesitated. I knew that whatever name I chose, she would attach meaning to it. So I gave her one. Grace, I said. We can call her Gracie. Carla's eyes widened in shock. Grace, she repeated. That's my mother's name. I saw her confusion, her surprise. She knew I had never liked her mother. She knew how her parents had always treated me, like I was beneath her, like I had ruined her life. I could see the question in her eyes. Why would you pick that name? But before she could ask, I made it clear. You can name her whatever you want, I said, my voice empty, as long as it has no connection to me or my family. The hurt on her face was unmistakable, but the new me didn't care. I just turned and walked away, falling for Gracie despite everything. On Saturday, I returned to the hospital. Not for Carla, for Gracie. The moment I saw her, so small, so fragile, so innocent, I felt something I hadn't expected. Love. Pure, unconditional love. It happened with Stephen and Lori, even though I didn't know the truth back then. And now it was happening again. I had spent months preparing myself to remain detached from this child. But in seconds, she had won my heart. And suddenly, I was asking myself the same question again. How could I love another man's child? How could I let this happen again? But I did, and there was no turning back. A confrontation with the in-laws. On Sunday, I returned to the hospital to pick up Carla and Gracie and take them home. When I walked into her hospital room, Carla's parents were there. I should have known they'd be waiting for me. The moment I stepped inside, her mother, Grace, turned on me. "Why didn't you visit Carla on Saturday?" she demanded. I had expected Carla to step in, to defend me, to at least say something, but she didn't. She just lowered her head, a single tear slipping down her cheek. And in that moment, I felt something deeper than anger. I felt disgust. "What I do or don't do is none of your business," I said coldly. "If you want to know more, ask your daughter." Grace's face flushed with rage. "I'm her mother," she snapped. "That makes it my concern." I turned my gaze to Carla again, silently giving her a chance to say something, anything. Finally, she lifted her head. "Mom, Dad," she said softly. "Just leave it alone. It's time for you to go. Dawn needs to take Gracie and me home." Her father wasn't done yet. "Listen, son," he said in that condescending tone I had always hated. "That's not the way to treat your wife's parents. But I guess I shouldn't be surprised from someone like you." I snapped. "Don't ever call me son again," I shot back. "I've never been your son, and I never will be. Now get out." Her parents stormed out, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel a shred of guilt. A final goodbye to the marriage. As we drove home, Carla let out a deep sigh. "Dawn, I'm so sorry about that." I laughed bitterly. "Why, Carla?" I asked. "They've never liked me. They've never respected me. They've always thought you married beneath you." She winced, but I didn't stop. "And now I understand why." Her head snapped toward me. "Because you never respected me either," I said. Her lips parted, but no words came out. "You started disrespecting me before we were even married," I said, my voice low and sharp. "And you've continued every single day since." Carla turned away, tears in her eyes. But I was done caring. A love that shouldn't exist. Over the next few months, I kept myself busy. Heavy check mark, I had a DNA test performed on Gracie, confirming that she was Steve's child. Heavy check mark, I didn't care. I already knew. Heavy check mark, I had the results documented, just in case. Heavy check mark, but none of it changed the fact that I loved her completely. Gracie was mine. Maybe not by blood, but by every other measure that mattered. And just like Stephen and Lori, I would raise her as my own. I spent more time with my children, making sure they felt safe, loved, and happy. Heavy check mark, I was the best father they could have hoped for. Heavy check mark, I loved them more than anything. Heavy check mark, I never once regretted claiming them as my own. Steve might have given them his DNA, but I was their real father. The last betrayal and the final straw. Despite everything, I still found myself thinking about Carla. The Carla I used to love. The Carla who had meant everything to me. God, I missed her. I missed who she used to be. And I hated that I still cared. But I wasn't done yet. I still needed to know one last thing. So, using my connections, I tapped Steve Wilson's office and home phones. It was illegal. I didn't care. And it didn't take long before I found exactly what I was looking for. The call that ended everything. A pay phone. A hushed voice. And then, "Hi, Steve, it's Carla." My blood ran cold. "Carla," he hissed. "What are you doing? You know you're not supposed to contact me." She laughed softly. "Oh, he won't find out, Steve. I'm using a pay phone at the mall." She thought she was so careful. She had no idea I was listening. "I just wanted to tell you, you're a father again." Silence. Then, "She's adorable, Steve. Her name is Gracie. You make the most precious babies." And then Steve chuckled darkly. "That's great, Carla," he said. "So, when do you want to start working on the next one?" I clenched my fists. But it was Carla's next words that shattered the last remaining piece of me. "You know I can't do that right now, Steve. Dawn and I haven't been intimate since he found out." She hadn't said because I love Dawn. She hadn't said because I regret everything. She had said, "Not right now." And that was when I knew. She had never really stopped. And she never would. The end of betrayal and the weight of revenge. The final conversation with Steve. I sat back, listening through the wiretap I had placed on Steve's phone. The moment Carla's voice came through the line, I already knew what to expect. "Hi, Steve, it's Carla." A sharp inhale from his end. "Carla," he hissed. "What the hell are you doing? You know you're not supposed to contact me. What if Dawn finds out?" She laughed softly, a sound that once would have sent warmth through my chest. Now, it just fueled the cold detachment I had built. "Oh, he won't find out, Steve. I'm using a pay phone at the mall. There's no way he can discover this." Her arrogance was astounding. "Sweetheart," she continued, "I just wanted to tell you, you're a father again. And she's absolutely adorable. Her name is Gracie. You make the most precious babies." Silence. Then a low chuckle from Steve. "That's great, Carla," he said, amusement clear in his voice. "So, when do you want to start working on the next one?" My fist clenched. Then, Carla spoke the words that sealed her fate. "You know I can't do that right now, Steve. Dawn and I haven't been intimate since he found out. Not because I love Dawn. Not because I regret what I did. Just not right now." Like she was considering it for later. Like she was just waiting for the right moment. I shut off the recording, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled slowly. And for the first time in months, I felt nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Not even betrayal. Because there was nothing left for Carla to destroy. She was already dead to me. The death of Steve Wilson. A few months later, Steve Wilson was gone. His car veered off the road and slammed into a tree. He didn't survive. Carla found out when she called his office and a stranger answered the phone. I had kept the wiretap active for this very moment. "Hello, this is Jonathan Davis." "Oh," Carla said, hesitation in her voice. "I was trying to reach Steve Wilson." The man paused, then let out a slow breath. "I'm sorry," he said, his tone gentle. "Steve Wilson doesn't work here anymore. May I ask who's calling?" Carla stiffened. "I'm just an old friend. I'll try to reach him at home." Another pause. Then the man spoke again. "Miss, I know this might be a shock, but Steve was in a car accident about 3 weeks ago." Carla sucked in a sharp breath, so hard that for a moment, I thought she had dropped the phone. "You should probably contact his family for more details. I'm so sorry to have to tell you this." And then, the line went dead. The aftermath of Steve's death. That night, when I came home, Carla gave me a strange look. I acted normal, as if nothing had changed. She didn't say a word. But that night, as I lay in bed, I could hear her crying in her room. And she kept crying, every night for a week. But not for me. Not for our children. She was mourning Steve. That told me everything I needed to know. The insurance money and Carla's suspicion. A few weeks later, Carla received a letter from the insurance company. Steve had taken out a life insurance policy with his children as beneficiaries. Carla showed me the letter. "How do I fill this out?" she asked. I walked her through the process. When she sealed the envelope, she gave me another long, searching look. "You didn't seem shocked when you found out Steve had died," she finally said. I didn't even blink. "Carla," I said flatly, "I have no feelings about Steve. Not anger, not grief, nothing. He was irrelevant to me." Her expression shifted slightly. "But I do care about one thing," I added. "That his children have what they need." Her eyes darkened with unease. She knew. She just didn't want to say it aloud. Her final plea, and my coldest response. One evening, after the insurance check arrived and was deposited into the kids' college funds, Carla finally broke down. "Dawn, can we talk?" "About what?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She took a deep breath, her hands twisting in her lap. "Will you ever forgive me?" she asked. "Will you ever love me again?" I shook my head. No hesitation. No false hope. Just cold, simple truth. Tears welled up in her eyes. "You're a cold-hearted man now," she whispered. I nodded. "Yes, I admit it. And that's because of you." Her breath hitched. "I used to be a good man," I continued. "A devoted husband. A man who gave you everything." "And what did you do?" I asked. Her tears spilled over. "You used me," I said, my voice like steel. "You used me for years. Lied to me for years. Disrespected me for years. And now," I said, leaning back, "you're finally paying the price." Her face crumbled, and, for the first time in a long time, I saw fear in her eyes. Carla's final fate. A week later, Carla asked me something I had been expecting for months. Did you have anything to do with Steve's death? I didn't blink. I nodded once. Her face drained of color. Are you going to do the same to me? She whispered. Another nod. Only a matter of time. And with that, she stopped asking questions. She stopped trying to rebuild what was already gone. She just waited. For 2 months, she lived in quiet terror. Then, one night, she finally gave up. She took her own life. And when I found out, I didn't cry for her. I hadn't lost Carla that night. I had lost her over a year ago, the moment I heard that recording. But I did cry. I cried for my children, because they were the ones who had to suffer. They were the ones who had to bury their mother. And that was the only pain I still felt. Carla's final letter. She left a letter for me. It was placed strategically, as if she knew I'd find it first. And it began with 2 simple words. Dear Dawn. And as I stared at the pages filled with empty apologies and meaningless regrets, I finally realized. This wasn't justice. This wasn't victory. This was just the wreckage of a life destroyed by betrayal. And now I had to live with what was left. The last letter and the path to healing. Carla's final goodbye. I found the letter exactly where she wanted me to find it. It wasn't long, but it hit like a blade to the chest. Dear Dawn, I cherished you. My love for you surpassed anything else. But I know my actions destroyed your love for me, and I can't endure a life without it. I understand the pain I caused you. I had hoped that, with time, you might find it in your heart to forgive me, that you might love me again. But I see now that my choices turned you into someone you were never meant to be. When I saw you confront Steve, I knew it was over. I knew the love you once had for me had vanished. I couldn't bear to accept that truth. I ruined a good man, and I will carry that guilt to my grave. I suppose you weren't the ideal husband for me after all, because what I truly wanted, was a man who could accept my selfishness, who could accept my love for 2 men. But that's not fair to anyone, is it? I should have let you go, but I didn't. I couldn't. And now look where we are. I hope that in my absence, you will be freed from the torment I caused you. That someday, you'll be able to let go of the anger you've carried for me. That you'll forgive yourself for what you became in the aftermath of my betrayal. I know the pain disappears when you're with our children. I see it in your eyes, the love and admiration they have for you. And it makes me happy to know that, even after everything, they love you just as much as they always did. When you look at them, I hope you see a part of me in them. And maybe, just maybe, you'll love me again through your love for them. I'm sorry, Dawn, for everything. Please forgive me for this last action. I just can't handle it anymore. I love you. Carla. Tears that weren't for her. For the first time in a long time, I cried. But not for Carla. Not for the woman who had betrayed me. I cried for the friend I lost. The one I would never share laughter with again. I cried for the lover I lost. The one who would never hold me again. I cried for the mother of my children. The one who would never see their graduations, their weddings, or meet her grandchildren. I cried for the emptiness in my heart, because the hate I had carried for so long had finally burned out. I had used that hate to bury my love for her. And now, with it gone, all that was left was a void. And for the first time, I wasn't sure what to fill it with. Burying the truth for good. The next morning, I destroyed the letter. Then, I went to the bank. I took everything, the evidence, the recordings, the files, and I got rid of it. No one would ever know, except for the DNA results, which I locked away in a safe deposit box, only to be opened if there was a medical need for my children to know the truth. Then, I rewrote my will. Heavy checkmark, I arranged for a medical trust fund with a trustee in charge. Heavy checkmark, the DNA results would only be revealed if a hereditary health issue arose. Heavy checkmark, otherwise, the truth died with me. I had made my decision. I would do whatever it took to protect Carla's memory. Not for her. For our children. They deserved to love their mother, without knowing the truth of what she had done. The in-laws and the unspoken blame. I never stopped Carla's parents from seeing their grandkids. They loved them. They treated them well. And in return, they resented me. I could see it in their eyes. They blamed me for her death. But they were smart enough not to say it aloud. Maybe they thought that if they pushed me too far, I'd cut them out. I wouldn't have, but I was grateful they didn't push me. Over time, the weight of their hatred faded. They stopped looking at me like a murderer, and I stopped looking at them like the people who had raised the woman who broke me. Healing slowly but surely, as the years passed, the emptiness in my heart began to fill again. Not with love for Carla, that was gone forever, but with love for my children, with memories of the good years. Because despite everything she did, for 8 years, she made me happy, and I didn't want to erase that anymore. I even forgave myself. It took a long time, but it happened, because I had 3 amazing kids who still needed their father, and I refused to let them down. A proud father's moment. The years passed, and then I sat in the front row as Stephen graduated from high school. I watched as he took his diploma from the school board president, who gave him a warm hug. Next up was Jennifer, his girlfriend. She got her diploma too, and another hug. Stephen had been with Jennifer since his first day of high school. For 4 years, they had been inseparable. And now, they were heading to the University of Illinois together, deeply in love, and everyone knew. One day, they'd get married, and as they walked off the stage, looking so grown up, I couldn't help but think Carla would be proud. After the ceremony, Stephen and Jennifer ran to me. They hugged me tight, their faces beaming with excitement. And for the first time in a long time, my heart felt whole. Dad, Stephen said, "Can Jennifer and I go to a few graduation parties before heading home?" I smiled. "Of course," I said. Jennifer hugged me again. "Thanks, Daddy," she said. "We'll see you and Mom later." I froze. She had said it so naturally. She had meant no harm. To her, Carla was still Mom. To them, she was still the loving mother they had known. And I had made sure it stayed that way. Because in the end, that was the only truth that mattered. Becoming a father again. As I watched Stephen and Jennifer walk off together, my heart felt lighter than it had in years. And then I heard it. "Thanks, Daddy." Jennifer had said it so naturally, so effortlessly. And in that moment, I realized something beautiful. I had become her father, too. Not by blood, but in every way that mattered. Meeting Leslie, a love I thought I'd never find again. I met Leslie, Jennifer's mother, a few weeks after Stephen started high school. She was the school board president, deeply involved in school activities. Stephen had talked about her often, about how kind she was, how much she loved Jennifer, how she was always there for her. And then one Friday night at a football game, I finally met her. I won't lie, I felt like a teenager again, because the moment I saw her, I was smitten, probably acted like a damn fool too. She was graceful, confident, and had the kind of warmth that made you want to be around her. Through our conversation, I learned that she had been a single mother for years. Her ex-husband had walked away when Jennifer was just 9, leaving her to raise their daughter alone. And yet, there was no bitterness in her voice when she spoke about it. She had moved forward. She had built a life for herself and Jennifer. And for the first time in years, I felt something I never thought I would again. Hope. A second chance at happiness. That night, I did something I hadn't done in a long, long time. I took a chance on happiness. "Would you like to grab a coffee after the game?" She smiled. "I'd love to." We spent a lot of time together after that. And a year later, we got married, building a new life together. For a long time, I thought I'd never be happily married again. But I was wrong. For the past 3 years, Leslie and I have been a complete family. Heavy check mark, she loves Stephen, Lori, and Gracie as if they were her own. Heavy check mark, and I love Jennifer like she's my own daughter. I've learned something important. You don't have to be a biological parent to love a child. Love isn't about DNA. It's about showing up. It's about being there every single day. It's about making them feel safe, loved, and cherished. That's what Leslie has done for my kids. And that's what I've done for Jennifer. We weren't just 2 people who got married. We became a family. No more secrets. From the very beginning, I was honest with Leslie. I told her everything. About Carla. About Steve Wilson. About the actions I took in the aftermath. I wasn't proud of everything I had done. But if I was going to love Leslie, truly love her, I couldn't build our marriage on lies. I expected her expression to change when she heard it all. And for a moment, it did. Then she took my hand. "That must have been hell for you," she said softly. I nodded. "But it's over now." I told her. It's in the past. She held my gaze for a long time. Then she nodded. Then I won't worry about our future. And with that, the weight of my past lifted. A heart filled with love. Life with Leslie is amazing. Heavy check mark, she is my best friend. Heavy check mark, my partner. Heavy check mark, my companion in everything. And after so many years of darkness, my heart is finally full again. Heavy check mark, full of love for my children. Heavy check mark, full of love for my new wife. Heavy check mark, and yes, there's still a small space for the good memories I shared with Carla. Not the painful ones, not the lies, but the genuine moments of happiness we once had. Because despite everything she did, for 8 years, she made me happy. And I've chosen to hold on to that instead of the pain. Seeing Carla in my children. Stephen has grown into a handsome young man. As he gets older, he starts to resemble his biological father more and more. But Lori and Gracie, they are Carla's little reflections. Heavy check mark, the same charm. Heavy check mark, the same beautiful features. Heavy check mark, the same fire in their eyes. And I can't hate her for giving me these children. I love them too much for that. And because of them, I can finally remember Carla with peace. Keeping Carla's memory alive. As my kids grew older, I made a promise. I would tell them as much as I could about their mother. Not the betrayal, not the lies, but the love she had for them. Because that part was real. And I wanted them to love her as I once did. To understand that, no matter what happened between us, she had loved them deeply. And that was the only truth that mattered. The future is bright. Just then, Leslie walked up to me, pulling me from my thoughts. Where did Stephen and Jennifer run off to? She asked. A couple of graduation parties, I said. She smiled. Then she leaned in close. If we hurry home, she whispered, we can start working on that baby we talked about. I laughed. Then I took her hand. Well, what are we waiting for? We got into the car and headed home. Life is good and only getting better. For a long time, I thought my story ended in tragedy. I thought I would never love again. I thought I would never feel whole again. But I was wrong. Because life moves forward. Because love finds a way back to us. Because after everything, I have a family that loves me. I have a wife who cherishes me. And for the first time in years, I know the best days of my life are still ahead.